The late spring air outside the Oakland Coliseum on a warm May afternoon, just past 3 p.m. on Friday, July 11th, 2025, carried a rich tapestry of scents, grilled sausages and hot pretzels wafting from food carts, the earthy tang of freshly mowed grass from the field, and the faint sweetness of blooming wildflowers drifting from the nearby Oakland hills. The buzz of anticipation thrummed through the crowd, a vibrant mosaic of Oakland Athletics fans decked in green and gold, their voices rising in a crescendo of excitement for the season's marquee matchup against the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Coliseum, with its weathered concrete facade, adorned with banners of past A's legends like Reggie Jackson and Rickey Henderson, and its sprawling outfield framed by ivy-like vines, stood as a testament to decades of baseball history, a battleground where underdogs had risen, legends were born, and the spirit of the East Bay endured. The energy was electric, the crowd a surging river of hope and nostalgia, flowing toward the gates with tickets clutched tightly, foam fingers waving, and faces alight with the promise of a memorable night under the stadium lights, the air thick with the hum of anticipation. Among this throng, moving with quiet purpose, was Henry Hank Coleman, a 66-year-old man whose life had been carved by steady, unassuming labor. His hands, roughened from 40 years as a warehouse worker at Bay Area Freight, a local shipping company in West Oakland, bore the calluses and faint scars of lifting heavy crates, stacking boxes, and enduring long shifts through rain and heat to support his family. His fingers, slightly bent from years of manual effort, told a story of resilience, each line a testament to the dignity he'd carried through every paycheck. Dressed in a neatly pressed olive green button-up shirt, ironed that morning with care, and khaki trousers that still held a crease from his last church visit, Hank carried himself with a quiet grace that needed no embellishment. His silver hair, trimmed with the precision of a man who took pride in small things, framed a face lined with the wisdom of a life well lived, and his deep brown eyes, framed by faint crow's feet, held a gentle strength. In his weathered leather satchel, a gift from his late wife Evelyn on their 25th anniversary, nestled a dog-eared copy of Langston Hughes's The Collected Poems, a tin of cinnamon mints he'd carried since his warehouse days, a small notebook filled with handwritten poems and reflections on life, a transit pass from the BART system, a faded photo of Evelyn and Darius as a toddler, and a brass keychain from his first warehouse job. Alongside these personal treasures were 2 premium tickets to seats just behind the visitors' dugout, a gift from his son, Darius, for Hank's 67th birthday next month. "You've given everything, Pop," Darius had said over a video call from Seattle, his voice thick with emotion as the Puget Sound glittered in the background, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his laptop. "It's time you sat front row and soaked it all in. You deserve it. More than anyone I know." Darius, a 37-year-old structural engineer and principal at Coleman & Associates, a growing firm in Seattle specializing in sustainable infrastructure, had planned to join his father for the game, a tradition they'd started when Darius was 10, watching A's games from the nosebleeds. But an urgent project deadline, designing a seismic retrofit for a 30-story high-rise in downtown Seattle, a $30 million contract that included funding for a community center in West Oakland as a tribute to Evelyn, had forced him to delay, promising to catch a late flight and meet Hank by the 5th inning. "Go ahead without me, Pop," he'd insisted, his voice firm despite the exhaustion creeping in from late-night design sessions, his desk littered with blueprints and empty coffee cups. "I'll be there as soon as I can, weather permitting." Hank had hesitated, his frugal nature whispering doubts about the cost of those tickets, a habit from raising Darius on a single income after Evelyn's illness. But Darius's persistence, rooted in a lifetime of admiration for his father's sacrifices, working overtime to buy him a science kit, driving him to school in that old pickup, won out. To prepare, Hank had spent a week plotting the cheapest BART routes from his modest West Oakland home, a 2-bedroom apartment filled with memories of Evelyn's laughter, Darius's childhood drawings on the fridge, and the faint scent of her lavender perfume, avoiding the cost of parking or ride shares. He'd packed a thermos of iced tea brewed from a family recipe passed down from his mother, a peanut butter sandwich on whole wheat bread, and a crisp apple from a neighborhood market to avoid the Coliseum's steep concession prices. Now, standing amidst the sea of fans, Hank felt a flicker of unease, a quiet sense that he didn't quite fit in this world of premium seats, corporate boxes, and boisterous privilege, his worn shoes scuffing against the pavement. His heart beat with a mix of excitement and self-consciousness, the digital tickets on his phone glowing with promise. Coleman. Row A, seats 5 and 6. He'd never sat so close to the action before. His rare baseball outings had been in the upper decks, the players distant figures under the summer sun, the atmosphere a faint echo of the game below, a memory of cheering with Evelyn from the cheap seats. The thought of hearing the crack of the bat, seeing the pitchers wind up close, smelling the dusty infield mingled with the scent of roasted peanuts. It was thrilling, almost otherworldly, a dream he'd never dared to claim until Darius insisted, his voice echoing with pride. As Hank approached Gate C, the Coliseum's towering entrance framed by banners fluttering in the breeze, honoring the A's 1989 World Series win, the community outreach programs he'd once volunteered for, and a mural of local kids playing ball, a wave of anticipation briefly eclipsed his doubts. The crowd pulsed around him, a kaleidoscope of green and gold jerseys, foam fingers, excited shouts, and the occasional chant of "Let's go, Oakland!" piercing the air. He presented his phone to a young security guard, a cheerful woman named Aisha, with a quick scan and a nod, her smile a brief respite from the tension building inside him, her uniform crisp under the afternoon sun. A large sign overhead, its letters slightly faded from years of sun exposure, read, "All bags subject to search. Please cooperate with staff." Hank, ever compliant, set his satchel on the inspection table, his movements deliberate and respectful, a habit from years of navigating authority with grace, his fingers brushing the leather with care. He watched as other fans, mostly white, clad in designer A's gear, casual athletic wear, or even business casual from nearby offices, passed through with cursory checks, their backpacks, totes, and even a rolling suitcase barely touched. The guards exchanging laughs with a group of frat boys, a group of college-aged men, their laughter ringing out over the crowd, breezed through with a bulging cooler bag stuffed with beers, the guard giving it a perfunctory pat before waving them on with a grin, their privilege a silent pass. Hank noted the ease, the efficiency, and felt a quiet pang of being out of place, his modest satchel, a relic of simpler times, its straps frayed from use, a stark contrast to the sleek, branded bags around him, a reminder of the world he'd never fully entered. Then, a figure stepped forward. Linda Harper, the gate's security supervisor. In her late 40s, Linda's sharp features were set in a mask of authority, her auburn hair pulled into a tight ponytail that accentuated her angular jaw, her eyes scanning the crowd with a skepticism that bordered on hostility, a glint of control in her gaze. She wore a navy jacket with security supervisor stitched in gold, its fabric slightly wrinkled from a long shift, her posture rigid with a sense of entitlement honed by years of unchecked power, her badge gleaming under the sun. She glanced at Hank's satchel, then at him, his unassuming shirt, his quiet demeanor, the slight stoop of age in his shoulders, the way his hands trembled slightly from the weight of the moment, the silver in his hair catching the light. A faint scowl creased her brow as she pushed his bag aside, isolating it from the flow of inspections as if it were a potential threat. Her fingers lingering on the leather as though testing its worth, her nails tapping impatiently. Her eyes lingered on Hank, an appraisal that seemed to judge not just his belongings, but his very right to stand among this crowd, a judgment rooted in assumptions she didn't bother to hide, her lips curling slightly. "Open every compartment, sir," she said, her tone curt and devoid of warmth, her gaze cold and appraising, as if he were a suspect rather than a fan, her voice cutting through the crowd noise. Hank's brow furrowed slightly, a silent question flickering in his deep brown eyes. A lifetime of navigating such moments, tempering his response, his breath catching for a moment. He'd noticed the college men sail through moments earlier, their cooler barely checked, their privilege a silent pass, a contrast that stung. A familiar unease stirred in his chest, a nod of recognition from decades of subtle discrimination, being watched in department stores as a young man in Alabama, questioned at bus depots during his move to Oakland, overlooked in lines at the post office after Evelyn's passing. Still, he complied, unzipping each pocket with slow, deliberate care to reveal his poetry book, the tin of mints, his thermos, a worn wallet with a photo of Evelyn, his notebook filled with verses about the Oakland docks, and the transit pass, each item laid out like a map of his life. The contents were humble, the possessions of a man who lived simply but with pride, each object a thread in the tapestry of his journey. Linda's expression remained unyielding, her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers pausing as if weighing the significance of a faded bus pass, her eyes narrowing. Instead of a quick pat-down like the others, she produced a metal wand and began probing his satchel with exaggerated care, the device scraping against the leather in a slow, grating rhythm that seemed to amplify the sudden hush around them, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. The inspection stretched on, far longer than those before him, drawing curious and uncomfortable glances from the crowd, families with children clutching popcorn, a group of retirees whispering, a young couple sharing a pretzel, their eyes darting away. Linda's eyes flicked to other fans who were waved through with warm smiles and quick nods. Enjoy the game. While her demeanor toward Hank grew colder, her movements almost theatrical, as if asserting her dominance in a public display of power, her wand lingering on the photo of Evelyn. "Is there a problem?" Hank asked, his voice steady but laced with a quiet edge, a ripple of controlled indignation breaking through his usual calm, his hands clenching slightly at his sides. "I've seen others go through without this level of scrutiny. What are you looking for that they don't have?" Linda met his gaze, her lips curling into a thin, dismissive smile that didn't reach her cold blue eyes, a smirk that carried the weight of her authority. "Just standard procedure, sir," she said, the words flat and unconvincing, hanging awkwardly in the vibrant air like a poorly rehearsed lie, her tone dripping with condescension. "If you don't like it, you're free to leave." Her tone carried a subtle challenge, a hint of smug satisfaction as she leaned into her authority, her posture straightening as if daring him to push back, her hand resting on her hip. The implication was clear, unspoken, but heavy. "You don't belong here. You're a risk." The other guards, Carlos, a young man with a nervous tic in his left eye, and Tara, a woman with a hesitant demeanor, her uniform slightly askew, shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting away from Hank's, their silence a tacit agreement to let Linda lead, their faces flushed with unease. A father with 2 kids in A's jerseys behind him cleared his throat awkwardly, his discomfort fleeting before he turned to his children, offering them a pretzel to avoid involvement, his eyes avoiding Hank's. Hank felt a flush of humiliation creep up his neck, the joy of the day souring into a sharp, bitter sting that settled in his chest, his breath shallow. This was supposed to be his moment, a rare gift from his son, a chance to feel the pulse of the game he'd loved since childhood, watching with Evelyn from the radio in their tiny apartment. Yet here he was, singled out, his dignity stripped in front of strangers who chose to look away, their indifference a second wound. "I'm not leaving," Hank said, his voice low but firm, a spark of defiance igniting within him, fueled by memories of Evelyn's encouragement. "You're stronger than they know, Henry, and Darius's pride in his quiet strength. I'd like to be treated the same as everyone else. I have a valid ticket, just like them." He nodded toward the college men now disappearing into the stadium, their laughter a fading echo, a stark contrast to his isolation, his finger pointing with a steady resolve. Linda's smile vanished, replaced by a hard, unyielding stare that seemed to bore into him, her eyes narrowing to slits. She crossed her arms, her posture stiffening, her jacket creasing under the tension, her badge glinting menacingly. "Sir," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, laced with a thinly veiled threat that carried the weight of her position, her breath hot with authority. "I'm the supervisor here. You can cooperate, or you can be removed from the premises. Your choice." She gestured to Carlos, who stepped closer, his bulk a looming presence, his radio crackling with static. The threat landed like a physical blow, the air growing heavy with tension, the crowd's chatter fading into a muted hum, the silence pressing against Hank's ears. His heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat of anger and fear echoing in his chest, his palms sweating against the satchel. He glanced at the crowd, hoping for an ally, someone to speak up against this injustice, but found only averted gazes, hurried footsteps, and the occasional whisper. "What's he done?" Probably trouble. Their voices a chorus of cowardice. The vibrant energy of the Colosseum felt like a distant memory, replaced by a cold, isolating silence that pressed against him like the walls of a cage, the banners above him mocking his exclusion. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm him, a familiar shadow from his youth when he'd faced similar slights in a segregated South, turned away from a whites-only diner before moving to Oakland with Evelyn's dream of a better life. He considered turning back, sparing himself further shame, walking away from the dream of this day and the tickets Darius had sacrificed to provide, the memory of his son's voice. "You deserve this, Pop." Fading. But then he thought of Darius, his fierce pride in him, his insistence that Hank deserved this moment. The late nights Darius had spent studying engineering to honor his father's work ethic, building model bridges on their kitchen table. He thought of Evelyn, her gentle strength guiding him through life's storms, her voice whispering, "Hold your head high, Henry, no matter what they say." Her face in that photo a beacon. This ticket wasn't just access to a game, it was a symbol of his son's love, a testament to his life of quiet perseverance, a validation of every crate he'd lifted, every shift he'd endured to provide, every prayer for Darius's future. He wouldn't let it be tarnished by this woman's prejudice. "I'm staying," Hank said, his voice steady, his eyes locked on Linda's with a resolve that surprised even himself, his shoulders squaring despite the tremble in his legs. "You can check my bag, you can search me, but you can't treat me differently because of who I am. I have a right to be here, same as anyone, and I'm not leaving until you honor that." Linda's eyes narrowed, her frustration palpable, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face like a storm cloud, her lips tightening into a thin line. She finished the inspection with sharp, aggressive motions, nearly tossing her belongings back into the satchel, the leather creaking under her force as if protesting the treatment, the photo of Evelyn fluttering to the ground. As she did, his wallet slipped out, falling open to reveal his driver's license, the faded photo of Evelyn smiling beside a young Darius, and a few crumpled bills earned from odd jobs after retirement, a reminder of his pride. "There's an issue with your identification," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, grasping for any excuse to delay him further, her fingers lingering on the photo as if it were evidence of something sinister, her smirk returning. She held up the license, scrutinizing it with exaggerated diligence, though the date and details were clearly valid, her pretense a thin veil over her intent, her eyes darting to the crowd for support. "Step aside," she ordered, her tone final, her hand gesturing to a roped-off area where others waited, their faces a blur of curiosity and indifference, a line forming behind him. "You'll need to wait until we verify this. Could take hours." "I'll wait right here," Hank replied, his tone unwavering, his gaze sharp and unyielding, a quiet strength settling over him like a shield, his feet planted firmly on the concrete. "And I will enter this stadium. I'm not moving until you treat me fairly, like every other fan with a ticket." His voice carried across the gate, drawing a few nods from the crowd, a ripple of support breaking through the silence. Linda's composure faltered for a split second, a crack in her facade as her eyes flickered with uncertainty, her hand pausing on the wand, but she quickly regained her icy demeanor, her jaw tightening with resolve. She gestured to Carlos and called for backup, a second guard, a tall man with a stern face, joining them, their radios crackling with orders. "Due to uncooperative behavior," Linda announced loudly, ensuring the small cluster of onlookers, now a mix of families, retirees, a group of teens recording on their phones, and a vendor pausing with his cart, could hear, her voice carrying over the fading crowd noise, amplified by the concrete walls. "We cannot allow you entry. You need to leave the premises immediately, or we'll escort you out." The second guard stepped forward, his hand on his belt, the threat escalating. The words hit Hank like a slap, the humiliation searing, a burning wave that started at his neck and crept up to his face, flushing his cheeks with a heat he couldn't suppress, his vision blurring with unshed tears. His dream of this day, sitting in those premium seats, hearing the crack of the bat, sharing a moment with Darius, was crumbling before him. The tickets in his phone, a mocking promise. The crowd's murmurs, a chorus of judgment. He knew he couldn't face this alone, not against Linda's authority, the second guard's presence, and the crowd's indifference, their silence a complicit wall. His hand, trembling slightly from the weight of the moment, reached into his satchel for his phone. An older model with a cracked screen, reliable and familiar, a lifeline from his warehouse days, its edges worn smooth. He dialed Darius, his fingers fumbling but resolute, his heart hammering with a mix of desperation and resolve, the numbers blurring as tears threatened to spill, the sound of the dial tone a lifeline. The call connected after 2 rings, the sound of Darius's voice a beacon in the storm, cutting through the noise. "Pop?" Darius's voice was warm but tinged with concern, cutting through the hum of his Seattle office, where blueprints and coffee cups littered the conference table, the faint sound of rain against the window in the background. "You at the game? Everything good?" Hank swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion, the raw sting of humiliation barely contained as he fought to keep his voice steady, his hand gripping the phone like a lifeline. "Darius, son," he said, his voice thick, almost breaking, the words catching like thorns, his breath hitching. "I'm having some trouble at the gate. They're not letting me in. The supervisor, Linda, she's treating me like I don't belong. She searched my bag more than anyone, called another guard, and now they're threatening to drag me out. I don't know what to do." Took 300 miles away, in a glass-walled office overlooking the shimmering expanse of Puget Sound, Darius Coleman stood at the head of a conference room, commanding attention in a tailored charcoal suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and steady presence, the fabric pristine, despite the long hours. At 37, He was a rising star at Coleman and Associates, his engineering firm specializing in sustainable infrastructure, known for his strategic brilliance, calm under pressure, and a quiet charisma that inspired his team. His desk, a testament to his dedication with models of bridges and seismic dampers. He was mid-presentation, unveiling the seismic retrofit design for a 30-story high-rise to a consortium of investors, architects, city officials, and venture capitalists, their faces a mix of skepticism and interest. When his phone vibrated with his father's number, the name Pop glowing on the screen. The room was tense, the stakes high. The $30 million contract could secure his firm's reputation, fund the West Oakland Community Center he'd promised as a tribute to Evelyn, and elevate his standing in the industry, the projector humming behind him. His assistant, Maya, a sharp-eyed woman with a tablet in hand, leaned in, her voice a hushed whisper, her brow furrowed with urgency. "Darius, you can't step away now. This contract's worth $30 million. If we lose their focus, we could lose the deal. And the community center. They're already asking about timelines." Darius's eyes flicked to his phone. The name Pop, a pull stronger than any contract. Then back to the room, where the investors watched expectantly, their pens poised over notepads, the clock ticking toward a critical decision point. But his father's voice, shaky, humiliated, carrying a pain that echoed from childhood struggles in West Oakland, the nights Hank worked late to buy him books, cut through the corporate noise like a blade, shattering his focus, the blueprints blurring in his mind. "Pop needs me," he thought, his heart lurching with a fierce protectiveness that overrode every calculated risk. The memory of Hank teaching him to ride a bike on those cracked Oakland streets flashing through his mind. Without hesitation, he raised a hand to pause the meeting, his gesture firm but respectful, the room falling silent. "Excuse me," he said, his tone calm but final, his eyes meeting each investor's with unapologetic resolve, a silent promise to return, his voice steady despite the storm within. "This is urgent. We'll reconvene in an hour. Maya, handle the transition." Stepping into the hall, the glass walls reflecting the gray Seattle sky, the rain streaking like tears, he pressed the phone to his ear, listening as Hank recounted the ordeal. The excessive search, Linda's disdain, the public humiliation, the threat of removal, the second guard's presence. Darius's blood ran cold, a glacial wave of shock freezing his breath, his fist clenching against the wall, then boiled with a searing fury that tightened his jaw and set his pulse racing. The image of Hank standing alone fueling his rage. He pictured his kind, hard-working father, his quiet strength, his endless sacrifices lifting crates to put Darius through college at UC Berkeley, the way he'd taught him to build model bridges with popsicle sticks on their kitchen table, the pride in his eyes at graduation, being targeted for no reason other than the color of his skin, a wound reopened from childhood taunts. A white-hot indignation surged within him, mingled with guilt for not being there, for letting his father face this alone while he chased corporate glory, the weight of the $30 million deal paling against Hank's dignity. "What's the supervisor's name, Pop?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, a dangerous calm that belied the storm raging inside, his mind already calculating his next move, the flight path to Oakland, forming in his head. "Linda," Hank replied softly, his voice steadying as he drew strength from his son's presence, even over the phone, the connection a lifeline across the miles, his breath steadying. "Gate C." Darius's mind raced, a whirlwind of calculated fury and strategic precision, the engineer in him mapping a plan. Coleman and Associates had secured a $2 million contract to assess the Coliseum's structural integrity after last year's earthquake concerns, giving him direct access to the facility's management, meetings with the operations manager, site visits with blueprints in hand, and a leverage point he intended to wield like a hammer. A single phone call could resolve this, force an apology, and ensure his father's entry. Perhaps a call to the operations manager he'd shaken hands with last month. But a call wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't undo the public shaming Hank had endured, the hours of standing under Linda's scrutiny, the weight of a crowd's indifference pressing on his shoulders. It wouldn't teach this supervisor the profound lesson she deserved, a lesson about the cost of prejudice in a city that prided itself on diversity, a city Evelyn had loved. It wouldn't address the systemic failure that allowed such behavior to persist, a failure he'd seen in the cracked foundations of old buildings. This required his presence, his authority, his unyielding demand for justice, a personal intervention to reclaim his father's dignity, to honor Evelyn's memory, to prove the community center's purpose. "Pop," he said, his voice steady and resolute, a promise etched in every syllable, his tone a vow. "Stay right there. Don't move. Don't say another word to her. I'm coming. Hang on. I'll be there." Hank's voice wavered with disbelief, a mix of hope and confusion threading through his words, his hand tightening on the phone. "Darius, you're in Seattle. How are you?" "I'm chartering a jet," Darius said, already motioning to Maya, who was typing furiously on her tablet to arrange a private flight, her fingers flying over the screen as she contacted their aviation partner, her voice barking orders to the pilot. "I'll be there in under 2 hours. Hold on, Pop. I've got you. I promise I'll make this right. Every single bit of it, no matter the cost." He ended the call, his mind racing with logistics, flight time, Coliseum layout, legal leverage, his heart set on action. As he turned to his team, his expression unyielding, his dark eyes blazing with purpose, the reflection of the sound behind him a stark contrast to the fire within, he issued his command. "Reschedule the meeting," he said, his voice cutting through the room's stunned silence, each word a command, his authority unshakable. "Family comes first. I'll handle the fallout when I return. Tell the investors it's a personal emergency, and I'll deliver the retrofit plan remotely if needed." He strode out, his shoes clicking with purpose on the hardwood floor, the weight of the $30 million deal fading against the urgency of his father's need, the community center's future, a secondary concern. He dialed his contact at the Coliseum, the operations manager, leaving a voicemail that was polite but unmistakably firm. "This is Darius Coleman. We have a critical issue at Gate C involving my father, Henry Coleman. I'm on my way from Seattle, and I expect a meeting with your CEO when I arrive. Be prepared to act. Have your legal team on standby." Back at Gate C, Hank stood firm, his satchel clutched tightly against his side, his posture a quiet act of defiance against the tide of indifference, his feet aching from the concrete. Linda, sensing his resolve, resorted to petty psychological warfare, brushing past him with exaggerated indifference, her shoulder grazing his as if he were invisible, her jacket sleeve catching on his shirt and tearing a small thread. She offered warm smiles to white fans, her voice syrupy with courtesy. "Enjoy the game, folks," handing out pamphlets to a family with kids, her laughter ringing out, while her glances at Hank were cold, occasionally laced with a sneer that twisted her lips, her eyes glinting with malice. "Still hanging around?" she muttered once, loud enough for him to hear over the crowd's hum, her tone dripping with disdain as she adjusted her ponytail, her fingers lingering on her badge. The crowd's silence was deafening, their averted gazes a sharp reminder of the world's indifference, a wall of complicity that hurt more than Linda's words. The teens' phones still recording. A few fans whispered, their words inaudible but their judgment clear. "What's he doing here?" Probably causing trouble, their voices a chorus of cowardice. The young woman with the camera phone stepped closer, her lens trained on Hank, the red recording light a silent witness, her voice urging, "Keep going, sir. We've got you on video." Hank felt a deep sadness settle over him, a familiar weight from a lifetime of navigating spaces where he was made to feel less than. Segregated schools in Alabama, suspicious glances in Oakland stores after dark. He pulled out his poetry book, the collected poems of Langston Hughes, its pages yellowed but beloved, its familiar weight a small anchor in the storm, the cover worn from years of comfort. He tried to read, his fingers tracing the lines of "The Negro Speaks of Rivers." But the words blurred, his mind a whirlwind of anxiety, anticipation, and a stubborn resolve to stand his ground. The rhythm of the poem a heartbeat. He trusted Darius, his strength, his love, his fierce determination to protect the family name. The memory of Darius defending him against bullies a shield. A memory surfaced. Darius at 12, standing up to a group of bullies who'd mocked Hank's old pickup truck outside their West Oakland home, shouting, "That's my dad's truck, and he's the best man I know." His small fists clenched, his voice breaking with pride. The next hour and a half was the longest of Hank's life, each minute dragging like an eternity under the weight of Linda's taunts and the crowd's indifference, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows. She grew bolder, her smugness swelling as she assumed his phone call had been futile, her confidence a shield against the unease creeping into her posture, her smirk widening. "Called your big shot son, huh?" she sneered, tapping her foot impatiently against the concrete, the sound a rhythmic taunt, her voice rising above the crowd. "Guess he's not coming. You might as well give up and save us all the trouble. Go back to where you belong." Her words were a dagger, her eyes glinting with a petty triumph as she turned to help a white couple with their bags, her smile returning like a switch, the couple nodding gratefully. The second guard loomed closer, his hand still on his belt, his radio crackling with updates, the tension mounting. Hank met her gaze, his silence more powerful than any retort, a quiet rebuke that spoke of his unshakable dignity, a legacy passed down from his mother's stories of resilience in the Jim Crow South, her voice a whisper in his ear. He felt a calm settle over him, a certainty that Darius would come through, that he wasn't fighting this battle alone despite the isolation pressing against him, the crowd's murmurs a distant hum. Suddenly, a murmur rippled through the crowd, a shift in the air like the first gust before a storm, the energy shifting from indifference to anticipation, the teens' phones rising higher. Tom Ridley, the stadium's head of security, a stocky man with a perpetually stressed expression and a receding hairline, received a frantic call on his radio, the static crackling over the noise, his face paling as he listened, his fingers tightening on the device. "He's here," Ridley muttered to himself, his voice a mix of dread and resignation, his hands trembling as he adjusted his tie, barking orders into the radio. "Get the CEO on the line now. Clear a path." A sleek black SUV pulled up, its tires screeching slightly on the asphalt, the doors opening with a purpose that silenced the whispers, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Darius Coleman emerged, tall and commanding in a tailored charcoal suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and steady presence, the fabric pristine despite the long flight, his tie a sharp contrast to the chaos. His dark eyes burned with controlled fury, his movements precise and deliberate, like a general stepping onto a battlefield, his jaw set with a determination forged in the steel of his father's lessons, his shoes gleaming under the stadium lights. He carried an air of power that drew every eye, fans recognizing him from local business profiles in the Oakland Tribune, security staff sensing the shift in the social hierarchy, their whispers a hum of recognition, the teens cheering softly. "Is that Darius Coleman? The engineer from Seattle? He's here for his dad." Darius's gaze swept the gate, locking onto his father, standing alone but unbowed, his satchel clutched tightly against his chest, a solitary figure against the tide, the photo of Evelyn still on the ground. His heart clenched at the sight, a mix of love and rage fueling his steps. The memory of Hank teaching him to ride a bike on those West Oakland streets flashing through his mind, the scrape of his knee a badge of their bond. He strode toward Hank, ignoring Linda's faltering smile, a mask slipping under the weight of his presence, her hand dropping the wand, and the nervous shuffle of Carlos and Tara, their eyes wide with sudden awareness, the second guard stepping back. "Pop," Darius said softly, kneeling to take his trembling hands in his voice warm and meant only for him, a balm against the hours of strain, his fingers brushing the calluses he'd inherited. His eyes searched Hank's, taking in the lines of fatigue, the quiet strength in his posture, the flicker of relief in his gaze, the tear streaking his cheek. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Hank nodded, tears of relief brimming in his eyes, his throat too tight to speak at first, the emotion a tide he couldn't hold back, his voice breaking. "I am now," he whispered, his voice thick with the weight of the moment, the suffocating tension lifting as Darius's grip steadied him, his son's presence a tower of strength. The crowd erupted in a soft cheer, the teens raising their phones higher, the young woman shouting, "That's beautiful!" Darius stood, his demeanor shifting to steel, his suit jacket creasing slightly as he turned to Linda, who stood frozen, her earlier confidence crumbling like ash under a sudden rain, her face paling. "Are you Linda?" he asked, his voice calm, but laced with an icy edge that cut through the silence like a blade, the crowd's murmurs fading into a hush, the air electric. Linda stammered, her face paling, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her jacket, her fingers betraying her nerves, her voice a tremble. Yes, sir. Is there an issue?" Her authority dissolved under Darius's gaze, her eyes flickering with a sudden fear, her knees wobbling. "There's a significant issue," Darius said, his words deliberate, each one landing with the weight of a gavel, his tone a mix of cold precision and righteous anger, his voice carrying to the crowd. He produced a sleek black business card, Darius Coleman, principal engineer, Coleman and Associates, and handed it not to Linda but to Ridley, who'd rushed over, his face ashen and sweating, his tie askew from the frantic call, his hands trembling. "Coleman and Associates is a key contractor for the Coliseum structural upgrades," he said, his tone formal but unyielding, his eyes never leaving Linda's, pinning her in place, his finger pointing for emphasis. "We've invested $2 million and countless hours to ensure this stadium's safety after last year's earthquake concerns. This behavior, targeting my father, humiliating him based on your prejudice, is unacceptable and will not stand. You violated not just him, but the spirit of this place." Linda's face drained of color, her eyes wide with dawning horror, her knees trembling as the reality of her mistake sank in, the gold stitching on her jacket a mocking crown, her hands clutching the table. Ridley, visibly shaken, stepped forward, his voice trembling, his hands clasping the business card as if it were a lifeline, his radio crackling. "Mr. Coleman, I assure you, we'll address this immediately." Darius cut him off, his gaze locked on Linda, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that echoed through the now silent gate, the crowd leaning in, phones raised to capture the moment, the teens shouting encouragement. "This man," he said, gesturing to Hank with a reverence that silenced the whispers, his voice breaking slightly with emotion, "is my father, Henry Coleman, a man who worked 40 years in a warehouse at Bay Area Freight, lifting crates to put me through college at UC Berkeley, a man who taught me to build bridges while he built our life, a man with more dignity in his little finger than you could ever hope to possess. You singled him out, searched him excessively, threatened to remove him with force, all because of your bias. That ends now, and you will answer for it, publicly, fully, and without delay." The crowd was silent, the weight of his words sinking in like a stone in still water, the air thick with a collective breath held, the teens' phones capturing every second. Linda's knees buckled slightly, her voice breaking as she stammered. "It was a mistake. I was following protocol. I thought he seemed out of place. I'm sorry." Her apology was hollow, a desperate attempt to salvage her crumbling authority, her eyes brimming with unbidden tears that streaked her makeup, her hands shaking as she picked up the wand. Darius's expression remained impassive, his face a mask of controlled fury, his voice cutting through her excuse like a knife, rising with passion. "Out of place? How, Linda? Because he's a 66-year-old black man with a valid ticket? Because he doesn't wear a suit or carry a designer bag? Because his hands bear the marks of a life of hard work, while yours are soft from wielding power over others? Or because you believe your authority entitles you to treat him as less than human, to strip him of the dignity he's earned through decades of sacrifice? You didn't just target him. You targeted every worker, every parent, every dream built on sweat. That ends today." Linda's face crumpled, her arrogance stripped away, replaced by raw, naked fear, her lips trembling as she struggled to respond, her hands dropping the wand again, the clatter a punctuation. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper, the crowd gasping. "I didn't mean—" "You meant every second of it," Darius interrupted, his voice rising slightly, a controlled fury that silenced the gate, his words a verdict delivered with precision, his finger pointing at her. "You chose to humiliate him, to make him feel small, because you thought you could. You thought no one would challenge you, that your badge gave you impunity. You were wrong, and now you'll face the consequences, before this crowd, before the city, before the world." The teens cheered, the crowd clapping, a wave of support building. Darius turned to Ridley, his tone shifting to cold professionalism, his suit jacket straightening as he adjusted his stance, his voice firm. "I want her suspended immediately, pending a full investigation into her conduct. I want a meeting with your CEO and your head of operations before this game ends, tonight, not tomorrow, in the executive suite. And I want a public apology from the Coliseum, published by 9 a.m. tomorrow, naming my father, Henry Coleman, condemning this discriminatory behavior in explicit terms, with no vague language, and outlining concrete steps to ensure it never happens again." Mandatory bias, training for all 300 staff members led by a civil rights organization, a quarterly review of security protocols with community input from West Oakland leaders, and a zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling enforced with quarterly public accountability metrics. I want it on your website, sent to every major news outlet in Oakland, the Tribune, Chronicle, KTVU, KPIX, and posted on X, Instagram, and Facebook with the hashtag #NaDuma Justice for Hank. No delays, no excuses. Is that clear? Ridley nodded frantically, his career flashing before his eyes, his hands trembling as he clutched the business card, his voice shaky. "Yes, sir. It's done. I'll arrange the meeting immediately. We'll comply fully. Legal's on the way." The crowd erupted, the teens shouting, "Justice for Hank!" the video already uploading. Darius softened as he turned back to Hank, his hand resting gently on his shoulder, the warmth returning to his voice, his eyes glistening. "Come on, Pop," he said, his tone a gentle command, bending to pick up the photo of Evelyn. "Let's go watch the game. You've earned it. More than anyone." He handed the photo back, their fingers brushing, a silent bond renewed. As they moved toward the gate, Carlos and Tara, the junior guards, stepped forward, their faces etched with genuine remorse, their uniforms rumpled from the tension, their eyes red. "Mr. Coleman," Carlos said, his voice trembling, tears streaking his cheeks, his hands clasped in front of him. "We're so sorry. We should have spoken up. We were scared of Linda, afraid of losing our jobs. But that's no excuse. We're truly sorry, from the bottom of our hearts. We'll do better." Tara nodded, her eyes red, her voice soft but earnest, stepping closer. "We saw what she was doing, and we didn't stop it. We regret our silence more than words can say. Please forgive us. We'll testify if needed." She offered a water bottle, a small gesture of amends. Hank looked at them, his anger softening, a flicker of empathy crossing his heart as he recognized the fear in their young faces, the power dynamics they'd navigated under Linda's rule, their uniforms a symbol of their own struggle. He understood the cost of silence, having lived it himself in the face of segregation, but he also saw their regret, their desire to make amends, their humanity breaking through. "Just make sure it doesn't happen again," he said gently, his voice warm but firm, a father's wisdom in his tone, accepting the water. "Not to me, not to anyone. Stand up next time, use your voices. That's all I want." The crowd applauded, the teens cheering louder, the video gaining traction. Inside the Coliseum, the game unfolded in a glorious blur of color and sound, the stadium lights casting a golden glow over the field, the crowd a sea of green and gold. The crack of the bat echoed like a thunderclap, the roar a living entity that vibrated through the stands, a wave rising with each play, the air thick with tension. The outfield stretched before them, vibrant under the artificial lights, the infield dust swirling with each slide, the ivy-like vines on the walls a nod to Wrigley's influence, the scoreboard ticking down. Hank and Darius settled into their seats, front row behind the visitors' dugout. The action so close, Hank could see the catcher's signals, hear the pitcher's grunts, smell the mix of grass, dust, and concession stand aromas. Popcorn, hot dogs, a hint of beer. He leaned back, a deep, contented sigh escaping him, a sound of profound relief and simple joy that seemed to carry the weight of the day away, his hands relaxing on the armrests. The earlier humiliation, though not entirely forgotten, began to fade, replaced by the sheer magic of the moment, the rhythm of the game, the camaraderie of the crowd chanting, "Sweet Caroline," the presence of his son beside him, a steady hand on his shoulder, the photo of Evelyn tucked safely back. Darius watched his father, his heart swelling with pride, as Hank's eyes sparkled with childlike wonder, the lines of strain easing with each inning, his smile a mirror of evelyn's. He'd walked away from a career-defining $30 million contract to be here, potentially jeopardizing months of negotiations and the community center project he'd promised to fund in West Oakland, a tribute to his mother's memory, the blueprints still on his desk. But seeing his father's smile, unburdened, genuine, a reflection of the man who'd taught him to build bridges, both literal and metaphorical, made it worth every sacrifice. The investor's emails fading into the background. He occasionally checked his phone, discreetly managing the fallout from Seattle, texting Maya to reschedule meetings and assure investors of his return. Personal emergency, we'll deliver, remotely. But his focus was on Hank, on ensuring this moment was everything he deserved, a repayment for every late night Hank had worked to keep the lights on, every story told by candlelight during power cuts. During the sixth inning, with the A's trailing 3-2, the crowd on edge, Ridley approached, his demeanor subdued, his tie askew, his face glistening with sweat under the stadium lights, his radio silent. "Mr. Coleman," he said, his voice strained but respectful, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture hunched. "The investigation into Linda is underway. She's been suspended without pay, and her termination is being processed by HR and legal, with a report due by Monday. The CEO and COO have cleared their schedules for you after the 7th inning stretch in the executive suite. Is there anything else you need? The media's already calling. Darius's voice was firm, his eyes unyielding. The stadium noise a distant hum behind him, his hand resting on Hank's shoulder. The public apology, published by 9 a.m. tomorrow. It must name my father, Henry Coleman. Condemn the discrimination explicitly with no vague language. Call it what it is, racial profiling, and commit to systemic changes. Diversity training led by the NITP, a quarterly review of security protocols with community input from West Oakland leaders. A zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling enforced with quarterly public accountability metrics, including dashcam footage. I want it on your website, with a live stream announcement, sent to every major news outlet in Oakland. The Tribune, Chronicle, KTVU, KPIX, and posted on X, Instagram, and Facebook with the hashtag Justice for Hank. No delays, no excuses. Stream it live at 8 a.m. Ridley nodded, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly, his voice a whisper. Understood, Mr. Coleman. It's our top priority. We'll have it ready by deadline. Legal's drafting now. He stepped back, his radio crackling with updates. The A's mounted a dramatic comeback in the 9th, the crowd on its feet, the tension palpable. Trailing 4-3 with 2 outs and a runner on third, the A's pitcher faltered, the Dodgers batter fouling off pitch after pitch, the count full. Then, with a crack that silenced the stadium, the A's shortstop launched a line drive into the gap, the ball sailing past the outfielder, the runner scoring, the crowd erupting in a deafening roar. Hank stood, cheering, his smile wide and unburdened, his hands clapping with a joy he hadn't felt in years, the sound mingling with the chant of, "Let's go, Oakland!" Darius joined him, their arms raised, their shared triumph deeper than the game's outcome, a victory over injustice, a testament to their bond, a moment etched in the green of the field. The Jumbotron flashed, "Walk-off win," and a spontaneous chant of, "Hank! Hank!" began, the crowd recognizing the man who'd stood tall. As they left the Coliseum, the night air was cool and alive, the city lights twinkling like stars over the bay, the distant hum of traffic a lullaby, the crowd still buzzing. Hank felt lighter, freer, more completely himself than he had in years. The shame and humiliation gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable strength, a certainty that he'd stood tall and that his son's love had moved mountains. The photo of Evelyn a talisman. Darius walked beside him, his phone buzzing with messages. Maya reporting 50,000 views on the teen's video, investors demanding updates. But his focus was on Hank, their hands brushing. The next morning, at 8:47 a.m. on Saturday, July 12, 2025, the Coliseum's public apology dominated headlines across Oakland and beyond. Published on the website with a bold banner, streamed live on YouTube with 10,000 viewers, sent to outlets like the Oakland Tribune, San Francisco Chronicle, KTVU, and KPIX, and posted on X, Instagram, and Facebook. It named Henry Coleman, condemned Linda Harper's actions as egregious racial profiling, and outlined a plan. NAACP-led training, quarterly reviews with West Oakland input, zero tolerance with dashcam enforcement. The story went viral, the live stream hitting 500,000 views by noon, hashtags number Justice for Hank, number Coliseum change, and number Stand Tall trending. The teen's video at 200,000 views. A local rapper dropped a freestyle tribute, Hank's Stand, on Instagram, amplifying the reach. Linda faced termination, her license under review, her career in ruins, the video a cautionary tale with 300,000 views. Hank became a symbol, invited to speak at a rally, his words, "Stand tall, use your voice," inspiring marches. Darius's firm gained attention, the community center breaking ground. Evelyn's name on the plaque. Weeks later, on August 8, 2025, Hank sat in Mabel's place, sipping iced tea, Mabel praising his impact. He smiled, thinking of the Coliseum's green field, Darius's hand, a viral legacy. Share this story by liking, subscribing, and posting hashtag #JusticeForHank to spread the word. Turn on notifications for more.